I'll go back again in my own history. At Warner Brothers,
Mhm.
it was so interesting because I think I was such a purple cow, like this, black girl,
Uh-huh.
lead, and there was one other black woman that was there, but I was that person that I didn't know I wasn't supposed to,
Mhm.
meaning that you're just supposed to answer the phones. You're just supposed to stand here and check people's names off. Who told you you were supposed to create a campaign? Who said, And so
Right.
I did these things not knowing that I wasn't supposed to. Um,
Mhm.
and it wasn't until years later, it's like you joked about the residuals. I was like, wait a minute. They probably hired an ad agency and paid them like hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions, to come up with that stuff I just did there. Okay.
Mhm.
But it wasn't till decades later that I looked at that, and I looked at it, it's like, yeah, you're the little brown kid in the corner. You just did it for them for free, and they took advantage of the fact that you didn't know that you didn't know. And I look back on it, and I do think that if I would have been a white male, I would have gotten promoted. I would have, became a manager. I would have become a vice president, because here I was, I did these campaigns and all that. And so that's experience number one. But I don't look back on it again. I was a kid that didn't know. I was doing this stuff because it was fun. I was having a blast. I'm like I came from a farm, in North Carolina, where I used to watch Bugs Bunny on a black and white floor model. Here I am on the 13th floor, and I've got Chuck Jones drawing me my own, Roadrunner and Coyote. And I'm like,
My
hey,
God,
I
that's
don't,
amazing.
I would have paid them to let me do this, you know what I'm saying? So it didn't phase me. There's a blissful ignorance to think, hey, maybe you should have been promoted. Hey, we should have asked for more money at least, because you didn't get a raise, for
Mhm.
bringing all these things to fore. I was just like a kid in a sandbox playing a playground.
Mhm.
Um, so, and again, like I said, it wasn't until I look back on it to say, hey, if you'd have been a white male, you would have been treated differently for the work you were doing.
Right.
But at this point, like I said, it's decades later. At the other job, at the company where I was running the story department, um, I faced blatant racism,
At
and I'm not going to
Senecal
name
or
names. Yes, I'm not going to name specific names. People can do the deep dive if they're interested.
uh-huh.
But there was a situation where this woman had just gotten out of college, and she was promoted ahead of me to some title. And it was after I'd done all this work of running the store department, running all these things, and running it, doing a good job, doing a great job,
Uh-huh.
and I had discovered a couple of projects, again, kind of in my own, ignorant bliss. There was, some titles that were around Broadway and stuff that went, we didn't get, but I had found. And even with that, I'll be very frank and honest, there was one or two projects that I brought in, and I honestly believe, again, whatever you want to do the deep dive, because
Mhm.
I was the black girl that brought it in, nobody paid attention to it. And so
Mm.
then when there was a bidding war going on, because CAA ended up represented, and they were, why didn't you? It's like, I told you about this project like a month ago. I had lunch with the agent. I had this in the reading list. So
Mhm.
Matt, don't. I brought this in like a month ago.
Right.
So that happened, but then with this, girl getting promoted over me, and I remember feeling so horrible, because at the time I've got a 3-year-old child to feed with, keep a job. And I had a friend, that my friend who I'm still friends with, his dad was a big attorney, in New York, and they volunteered to do a class a discrimination suit. And I decided not to do it. This was in 1989,
Mhm.
because I knew I would never work again. I knew it. And I did have a case, because I sat down tearfully and told them the story in this Madison Avenue law firm, what happened, and showed them my resume. This girl just graduated, she's a white girl. I'm, a black woman. And I clearly had a case, but
Mhm.
I decided not to file it because I knew I would not work again.
Right. Right.
And but and I continued to work. I kept the job, until the company kind of went under and, people started getting laid off and stuff. And then that's when I moved to California a couple of years after that.
Hmm. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. That's terrible.
Yeah, it was at the time very painful. It was a very, very painful thing, but what was most painful is like I knew I had to keep a job. I knew that I could not go through with this. I knew it. I knew that because it would come in the paper. I mean, I don't know back then in '89 how much of a media thing it would be if like the guy now is called, suing the NFL. We haven't heard about him in a couple weeks, so so I don't know if it would have been that big of a deal, but I know within the industry and New York at the time being a small place, there's not many Black people at that time working at studio, at networks or studios. So it would have been a thing. I knew that.